All right, good morning and welcome to our UWI Guardian conversation. And we are so pleased today to have with us our guest speaker, Dr. Camille Dickson-Deane. And certainly it's going to be an intimate session. And in-house today, we have the Settle team members. We have Dr. Justin Zephyrin, who is our faculty development specialist. We have Mr. Mark Garcia, who is our research technician. We have Mr. Javed Mohammed, who is our e-learning specialist, support specialist. And we have Mr. Randy Duku, who is our admin here at Settle. I want, in a very, very special way, to announce that we have one of our nominees here from the awards. And so Dr. Pare, certainly thank you for joining us. And certainly, so today's event is perhaps just a beautiful opportunity for us to really marinate our brains on the topic on the theme, ready, set, click, negotiating quality in the blended online teaching learning environment. Certainly it's an invitation to be ready, to be resilient, resilient in the face of uncertainty or in the face of adversity. At the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, Settle, we hold dearly to faculty readiness because it's certainly crucial in the ability to cope and respond to complex teaching and learning demands. Our present teaching pivot back to the in-person, back to the in-person teaching is a firm example of this complexity and certainly necessitates resilience. And while we acknowledge the need to pivot to in-person teaching, we do so with a sense of purpose to support resilient, ready learning in so many meaningful ways. It's certainly not going to be business as usual. So the notion of set in the theme, while I'm reflecting on that, invites us to be intentional, ready, set, intentional, to have a plan that addresses contextual appropriate approaches and strategies. This include but not limited to adopting student-centered approaches, valuing, the whole idea of design for context, and it's important for us for this reason. And also we also want to look at the whole idea of object-oriented technology use or technology integration within the teaching and learning setting. So that's where we have the click. The click in there invites us, it's a powerful metaphor that invites us to make an appropriate action or push, because if you're clicking, you're not clicking everywhere. It's object oriented. You're selecting where to click that button, or you're not all over the place. And so the click really invites us to be intentional about our consideration of quality and being purposeful, yet contextual. And so this is an invitation to join us. Everyone, I know you are here. We have persons here from different departments. I'm inviting you in the chat room. If you can, in the chat room, indicate where you're coming from, which department you're joining from, and certainly that would be helpful to get some context. I'm just gonna put quickly here on screen, so you're seeing Dr. Dickson-Deane, ready, set, click, negotiating quality in the blended. So please join us on Thursday, the 22nd of September at 5 p.m. and it will be streamed on Zoom. So as you indicating, can we indicate quickly in the chat which department you're joining from, so at least we get an idea in the chat, so we can certainly see that, certainly see where you are joining from. We see the number of different persons, so we see that there. So let me just go ahead and give a quick introduction of our guest speaker, and we're going to be quite informal in terms of how we're going to present the session. So Dr. Camille Dickson-Deane is a senior lecturer in higher education at University of Technology, Sydney, Australia. She is a Fulbright and OAS, Organization of American States, scholar with expertise in 3 diverse geographies. Her research focuses on the socio-technical spaces in fields of learning, teaching, and performance, and has demonstrated this expertise by publishing journal articles, book chapters, media pieces, while producing artifacts, completing expert reviews, conducting evaluations on learning design for face-to-face, blended, and online environments. Dr. Dickson serves on 2 Q1 editorial board, educational technology research and developmental and journal and computing in higher education, as well as serving in leadership positions with AECT, and the International Board of Standards for Training, Performance, and Instruction, and has a wealth of experience working in international context. She's recently, you will tell us about that book that you co-edit, Dr. Dickson-Deane, recently. That's one of those I remembered recently. And she also is Trinidadian. We know that she's Trinidadian, and we are proud to have her here with us, being part of that, having those indigenous perspectives, being able to share that with us today. And so we certainly look forward to the session on Thursday. And so this gives us an opportunity to kind of tease things out and have that conversation with her while she's here with us. So ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, please join me in welcoming, giving a very warm round of applause to Dr. Dickson-Deane as she comes in. So again, Dr. Dickson-Deane, I'll just, in a very meaningful way, just pose some questions, and I'll struggle the professional and the perhaps not so professional, and so we get an idea of who you are, and then I'm going to invite some of my colleagues to pose some questions as well. And the first question is I would want to ask is, what brought you into this field of learning design? What drew you into this into the particular area? You're in Australia. How did that Australia happen? Can you give us an idea? And I know earlier you were talking about your love for Pomerac. You can squeeze that in if you want, but certainly we're looking forward to get an idea of who you are in terms of your professional and historicity of that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Leroy, for having me. Thank you, everyone. And seeing that this is an intimate environment, just call me Camille. Let's not be formal about it. So I did my undergrad at UWI. I did computer science. I have a love for just programming. And I went to conference. I went to St. Joseph Conference, Port of Spain. Didn't get the opportunity to do computer programming, mainly because there wasn't enough subscription, not enough people in my space to do it at O levels or A levels. So when I got to UWI, I did it there. And then I applied to get an OAS scholarship to do software development because I wanted to design software. Learning wasn't part of it. It was just at that time in the period of computers and everybody getting their hands dirty that you just thought, woo, it would be cool to design computer animations and to do games and stuff like that, and do that kind of background work. While I was there, I got introduced to human computer interface design. Oh. And this was in Rochester Institute of Technology. This is where I was. And one of the professors there had me TA in that class. It was very interesting. Didn't stick into learning yet, but it was just interesting. The notion of how computers and humans interact and their interfaces and what can happen and what can at that time didn't happen. We didn't have touch screens at that time. All of this stuff. And one thing I don't know if you guys know where Rochester is in upstate New York. It was a hub for a lot of large tech companies. Kodak was there. They were still doing the cameras and the filming and developing film. So Kodak was there, Xerox was there. One company called West Group, which is now Thomson Reuters. Reuters was there, and it was just a huge hub for a lot of big tech manufacturing firms. And being in Rochester, they had a huge partnership, what we call work integrated learning now, cooperative learning, where you you got students from the schools going in, or the universities going into the workplace, learning and going back and forth and sharing to develop the curriculum, etc. So that's what was happening there. Because I got an OAS call, I had to come back home to serve my time. We call it serve your time, and you put your inverted commas. So you return home to give back to your country, as we always should. And they didn't have a place for me. They wanted to put me back in primary school. I was like, no, I'm not going back to teaching primary school. And teaching was not in my purview at all. At that time, when I returned, COSTAT, and you guys should know COSTAT was now beginning up. It was now starting. And that's where I got my feet wet on teaching. And while I was teaching normal programming, computer science, hardware and software design, etc., certain things just didn't seem right in what I was doing. And one day we had one student, this is a pivotal moment for me, one student who was legally blind asking to do my web development course. And everybody told her no. They denied her. The registrar said, no way, it's not possible. You can't do it. You can't do it. And she was just, I was walking in, she was walking out. And I just allowed her to pass. And she said, are you the teacher for this course? And I said, yes, I am. And she said, no one will let me do your course. I said, well, what's wrong? She said, well, I'm legally blind. And then it dawned on me, because she was blind, her differences is what created the barrier for people to allow her to progress. And I said, what documents I have to sign? I did the work. I went and I did the work. I learned how to use JAWS. I learned everything I need to do. And think about in those days, JAWS was a mammoth software that it just bogged. This just started, every machine had to stop working for JAWS to begin so that they could help the student do their work. And she was one of the best students in the class. And she was legally blind.
And certainly that's a testament to leaving no student behind.
Leaving no student behind. And she got one of the highest scores. She was one of the best. She just understood, because what people didn't realize at that time, and I didn't realize myself as I was working with her, is that when you lose one of your senses, everything else is amplified. Everything, all of your other senses are amplified to accommodate for that sense that you've lost. I didn't know that was design. I didn't know that was, in the design space of learning and understanding how learning occurs. And that's what got me really interested and intrigued about understanding how learning occurred. And I applied for my Fulbright, and they understood my dilemma. And that's how I went to do my PhD, understanding how to design, understanding differences. And that's why I did my PhD in individual differences of design, the design context of individual differences.
Well, so that's a powerful story, because you started exploring the whole idea of meeting student needs, diverse student needs. And perhaps I would, besides the JAWS, were there any particular redesigning of the course or purposefulness that you had to think about, or you had to struggle with?
Well, if you think about it, it wasn't an online course, but it turned into an online. The rest of the students were doing online. They were doing like a blended work. I was in the space, but I had them do exercises. It was our first getting our feet wet. Do what I call a poke dance, we were letting them do some work online. They come to the labs before school or after school or whatever, and then class we discuss and stuff. So we did a little bit of that going back and forth. What was interesting about that is because of the traditional nature of what people perceive learning to be, there was a lot of, how should I say, apprehension to the methods I used. So, one day I would take people to TGIF, was right around the corner. I would take them to the TGIF. So how you can take the students out of the classroom, how will they learn? I say, well, let's see. So the task at that time was for them to design logos and website color schemes for a TGIF restaurant. what color schemes would you use? They know the colors, but I said, well, let's go and immerse ourselves in the space and see what else came up. Besides the traditional color scheme, the task was to find out other color schemes that would work once you've immersed yourself. So I bought them. It was about maybe 20 students. You can't afford much, buy them dessert. Everybody said that I need dessert, and they look around and they had a feel for TGIF. And it was a huge challenge for other faculty members to understand that I took class outside of the learning environment, outside of the four walls that was there. I said, well, why not? And they were like, well, why? And we couldn't answer the questions, but all we just knew is that there was back and forth going, of a toggle of this is not normal, this is not what you should be doing. You should be sitting down behind the desk, talking to them, you stand up and you tell them what to do. And I go like, well, sometimes I will not always have the answers, but I can tell you together we can discover the answers, right? And their task was simple, create a color scheme and justify why. And they justified it, I had dessert there, and this is the color that came to mind. So that, they came up with different color schemes, and that's what, made me interested in what I was doing from a different perspective. Hence me doing my PhD in Missouri. I did my PhD in Missouri. Go Tigers, as we normally say, MIZ, And after that, I stayed a little while longer, getting a feel of what the US market looked like. And as I was leaving the US market, someone recruited me from Australia to the University of Melbourne. I got a call. They said, we followed your work. Would you like to apply for this job? And I go like, well, where is it? They said Australia. But I said, I always believe in investigating, and I haven't said yes and I haven't said no. So the only way we can find out is go. All right. And I saw it as a 2-day holiday. Took the flight to Australia. They paid for everything, had a grand time, all my meals, everything was covered, did a little bit of sightseeing. Came back and I said, well, I had that experience, came home. That was it. And then they called back and they said, hey, we want you to come over. And that was the beginning of it. That was in 2016 in Melbourne. And now I'm at UTS. And that's why I'm over here. And that's how I'm over here.
Yes. Okay, thank you so much, Camille. And, because I know this is a very short conversation, and before I open up, and I'm gonna just welcome our other nominee, Dr. Amy Deacon just came in, so certainly welcome, Amy. I see one of our in-house person saying, can I enroll in your course? I guess he felt that he needs to be in your course. Javed certainly there indicating that. No, help us to reflect on the theme. What your key takeaways from the theme: ready, set, click, negotiating quality in the blended and online teaching environment. Help us. How can you, if we were to do a co-construction of reflection and what we should think about, some of those things we should be thinking about?
So the first thing I will ask you guys to think about is, what is the definition of quality? Not from the dictionary sense, but from your own individual spaces. It's subjectively. When you're designing something, you have to think about it subjectively. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand that. You have to understand who's supposed to be influenced by your outcome. All right. So the subjective notion of addressing the meaning of quality is how it should be approached at that point. Because quality for what's happening in Trinidad or even in UWI is not quality for what's happening in Australia here with me at UTS. All right. And then also understanding that, and I'm seeing that Javed said meeting standards, there is a standard that you have to achieve. And the question is, should you be comparing yourself to the US? Should you be comparing yourself to Australia? Should you be comparing yourself? Those are different contexts. So understanding what the context requires of you, what your students require of you, what infrastructure you have, what do you have around you that you can use that measures and help you measure quality at that space and time, and then help you grow it to different meaning for that space and that time is important, right? And I think that's how you can look at that theme that you have identified there for your awards. A lot of people don't think, people think that quality means that we have to meet the US standards or the UK standards. Sometimes just being yourself is quality enough and successful enough, because universities are for social good, and the social good is immediate and right next door, right outside your window, which is your society, your immediate society. And to really reach your society, you have to reach them where they are. And most contexts don't realize that your context is not the UK context, and it's not the US context, right? So like I was saying before we started this session, if Pomerac in season, maybe Pomerac is what we need to talk about in classrooms, to design about, to talk about, to eat, to feel, to, you know, to teach about, right? There's so much you can do with your own context. I hope that answered your question, Leroy.
Yes, it does. It really does, in a very meaningful way, address the whole idea for us to be contextual. And we start at home, you know, the idea of whatever good we can do starts at home, starts with you, starts with the context and the learner in mind. So I'm really happy that you've give us a clear idea of how you're reflecting on this. I'm going to invite our nominees. We have Dr. Pere and Dr. Deacon. And so Dr. Pere, if you can go ahead, I'm going to pin you. And if you can go ahead and ask your question. So certainly you continue the conversation with Camille.
Yeah, thank you, Leroy, and thank you, Camille, for your little perspective on quality and quality being subjective, because yeah, that really does ring bells for me in the context of the subject that I teach, which is statistics. You definitely have to take it subjectively because of these, well, for me, how I measure quality is if the student is leaving the classroom with skills needed for the workplace. So yeah, and of course that it's in itself would be subjective. So thank you very much for that. It does make me feel like I'm on the right track. The question I have, so I'm actually enrolled in Cuttle right now, and we had 1 week of class so far, and what the theme was peer observation. And I'm just wondering, so I was looking up a little bit about PORT, peer observation within your university, and I'm just wondering if you could share a little more about how, you know, the value that adds at the university, and how, if you're aware of the journey at all with regards to establishing PORT there, that would be very insightful.
So I'm not familiar with PORT per se, but I am familiar with peer observation and peer review systems within the university from a teaching and learning perspective. It is the most valuable thing you'll experience. That's all I can say to you. It's the most, and it's most humbling as well. A lot of people think of the critique nature, and they use the word critique to highlight the negativity that is associated with doing peer reviews, right? Peer review should not be seen as negative. Think of it as a step. You have to grow, right? You don't always just stay at the same level in your teaching piece, regardless of where you are in your journey. So a peer review can help you, give you that little tweak, a little crack that is a step that you need to fill so you can move forward. So looking at it from a perspective and turning it on its side, I always tell people, turn things on their side. And when you see the critique, look for it and see, well, okay, it's pointing out these things that could help me. The experiences I've had with peer review have always, some of them have not been well. I think the peer review system has to be well designed to make you feel that you're benefiting from it, and know that it's It's there with a little whip waiting to lash you and tell you, you know, this is the way you need to go and that's the way you need to go. And this is what you need to do and this is what you need not do, right? It has to be well designed to support you in your growth, because that's what peer review is supposed to do, support you in your growth. So one thing I would always say when you're designing your peer review system is that you need to ensure that it's, and over here, because academics, we have our own, I always say academics, when you get that PhD, you have a little quirk, you get a little ego. You can't get an ego, you can't have a PhD without an ego. That's just me. You work hard for it, you get a little of, you feel that you can be, right? So we have to nurture that and keep it a little bit at bay at the same time and manage it going forward. Part of that is getting buy-in with those people with the egos that they can improve. And to do that is a hand-holding situation. So the experiences I've had some good experiences with peer review and bad experiences. And some of the good ones I'll share is where the peer review system has been voluntary. The systems here for tenure and promotion is that you can put forward your peer review portfolio of how many academics or peers you've had come and sit in your classes, hear you deliver your speeches or hear you deliver your lectures, see you in the labs, etc., and add that to your tenure and promotion and show how you've grown from that. And then there are peer reviews that are used to diminish you, to point out all the things you've done wrong, and then make you feel that you can never move forward. So in between there sometimes is a good mixture of what you need to design and experience, as well as help project for your own learning journey and learning and teaching journey. Hope that helps.
A lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pere. And I'm going to invite Dr. Deacon to pose a question. And then Dr. Pere will come back to you if you have another question, certainly. So thank you. Thank you for doing that. So Amy?
Thanks. Yeah, and apologies for being late. I had to dash. I just realized I was back from my lecture in time. I thought I'd missed it completely. So I'm happy to join for now.
Yes.
Yeah, I was very interested to hear your response to that last question, because actually when the nomination process, asked about here, can you suggest some colleagues who've experienced watching the teaching? And actually that was a very challenging thing to think about, because it's not something we do routinely in our department. I don't know how prevalent that is around in other faculties and departments, but we're all so busy and we all have these teaching loads, and so it's not built in that time to the way I see it, it sort of would have to be formally included somehow for us to really ensure everyone did it. Last week I had an interesting experience whereby we have a temporary lecturer who's not really done much face-to-face lecturing before, so she asked to sit in on my lecture for her own benefit, just to get a feel for what it was like and what, how to go about it. But it was actually really useful then to chat with her afterwards from both perspectives, and I had this nice opportunity to say, well, how did that make sense to you, and how did you feel that went? Did you think the students from where you were sitting, were they engaging? And so it reminded me that really, really is a very useful tool, and I'd love to think of more ways in which we could like more formally incorporate it as a routine thing to do. Everyone, because both parties definitely would benefit from that.
Yes.
And yeah, in terms of another question, I guess one that was more of a comment. A question, something that I'm also really interested in is, the pandemic, when we were doing much more online teaching, was assessment. And I guess it does some ways relate to quality, but as we just discussed, not completely. It's one way, it's connected in some ways to that, but we have to do it. And I just wondered if you had any reflections on the change that the online environment meant for assessment.
So, and Levi kind of intimated to the book I just edited on what happened during the pandemic from all different perspectives around the world. Yes, there are changes that happened in assessment. One thing I could tell you from one side of the desk, because I always believe the desk, let's not use a circular desk, which is the best desk ever, right? Let's use a square desk where the teacher's on one side and students on the other, because most teachers, that's how they think. that the delivery mode comes, right? There is a line that you shouldn't cross. And with the pandemic, a lot of fears came open. You saw everyone's fear on their sleeves, regardless of whether they were a student in the learning space or they were an academic in the learning space. And through that, you actually saw as well that people's fears were somehow consumed into the assessments to be more of a tangible, meaningful, as opposed to really relating to the actual learning. So the learning outcomes was secondary. Their fears of what online was primary, the realities. And it turned into almost like we turned backward into, this is how learning must be. I have to see you do it. Right. So a lot of academics believe that if I don't see them write the exam, it's not going to happen. No learning is going to happen. If I don't see them with their cameras on, no learning is occurring. If I don't hear them, and if they're not keeping still and they're not dressed appropriately, they can't learn. It's almost like we turned the whole dial back on what learning means. Learning is no longer cognitive, it's all the surface related stuff. So when we came back to assessments now, that's what happened. So the whole learning paradigms shifted, but assessments took a real big hit. We no longer assessed for learning. We assessed for visual appearance of learning, if that made sense. All right. And it took a lot of people, a lot of academics, a lot to give that notion of give it up again, to say that, remember, learning happens up here and is operationalized through what the students do, whether you could see them or not. And that was the biggest thing. Some people are still struggling with that notion, and they're still almost sticking with that. They're almost like, if the pandemic not only got us ill and really socioeconomically wise, really affected us, but it also brought up these old fears of what learning is, and just reeled us. It's like history, all the work on what learning is and cognition, and all the years of learning and research just rolled itself backwards. So from an assessment point of view, I could say that some people got really creative who were comfortable in the space, and some people lost all sense of what the meaning is to learn and perform because of the technology associated with the space. And it's a fear of understanding how that technology should be used to purport learning. So I could go into more detail and be mindful, but I would love to just do a whole discussion on assessment design and what it means from a face-to-face lecture to an online lecture to a blended lecture. It's just totally different conversations based on your disciplines, based on what technologies you have access to, based on your literacy skills of what you can do with the technology in that space and time. And not only you as an academic, but also the students, because we ask them to do things we assume they can do. You know, we have this belief that they're digital natives. They're not digital natives. The digital natives are the tools that they use growing up, which is most likely a cell phone, not a computer. Right. So it's a lot of discussion and unpack. And that's a really good question, Amy. That is a whole different, that could be a series of discussions, Leroy.
Yes, I was, and I see Chris in the chat is saying yes, please. So, and we know that you're super busy, but we would be honored certainly to find some way to squeeze you in.
Yes.
You know, I really love that. So, Amy, if you have another question, you can pose it, and then I'm going to go back to Dr. Pere.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear that. I mean, the challenge I think I find with right now is I do feel like I learned to be more creative, like because of the restrictions and having to do open book exams and that sort of thing. And so I'm now faced with this challenge of how do I take the good things of what I learned and now bring them back to where we are actually required now to use more controlled conditions for exams and more traditional methods of assessment. But can I get the best of what I managed to come up with over 2 years and still integrate that and use, you know, improve, like see the silver lining of that creativity come, you know, into the future. So got to think some more about that.
Think about it. I can talk for years on this. I know I have a bad voice right now. I could talk about years and years on assessment design. It's one of my biggest joys, especially from a disciplinary nature, to unpack what is required, what needs to be achieved, and then come up with a way that could really bring joy to what the students are doing, as well as meaningful to what they need to do when they leave your classrooms. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Puri?
Thank you again. So your last remark in terms of when the pandemic came around, you know, some persons were comfortable within the space, and then there were others who just, you know, essentially everything they were doing before just went out the window, and they essentially, I want to use the word failing, but that might be kind of harsh, but it might be that it's essentially. And so what you were saying essentially sounded very familiar, because I'm doing some research at the primary and secondary school level here in Trinidad with regards to teaching and learning during the pandemic, and all those things that you said is essentially what's coming out of the research. And so I know this is a higher education forum. I'm just wondering, I mean, the same thing that was happening at primary and secondary schools is also happening within the higher education, and what needs to be done, given that we're living in technological times, for this not to happen again in the future. What are the steps that we need to take so that we're prepared, perhaps for another pandemic, or just even other technological changes that are going to happen in the future?
So
sorry if that's a hard question.
No, it's not a hard question at all. I'm chuckling because I had a conversation maybe about a year and a half ago with some colleagues. And some of my colleagues, we're all what we call displaced academics, where we're from different countries working in other countries. And we share about what our home countries would have been like, and we kind of hypothesize. And one of the hypotheses was, and I'll just say it, and then you can sit down and think about it and reflect upon it. Third world countries should have prospered during the pandemic. Third world countries should have prospered during the pandemic, but we didn't. We didn't because first world countries told them you could not. Right? Third world countries have and it's sorry to classify, because there's the old classifications of countries, and you know that's what it is, right? Countries that do not have the socioeconomic funding and everything that other countries have should have prospered, because they have been doing this without for so long. We should have prospered. Trinidad should not have been stressed out. I mean, the Caribbean in its whole has hurricanes how many times a year? How many times do we lose power? How many times do we have floods? How many times? And we get through it. One pandemic and we didn't know what to do. Wasn't that strange? Wasn't that strange? All right. How should I say it again? So this is one of my colleagues. I was just thinking about him, Titalini, and we were saying, that's true. We have been, I grew up in Trinidad where there is no power on any given day. I know it's different now, or water on any given day. Yet school still happened. Your shoes were still white. You're walking through flood, but your shoes, you had to go to school, your shoes were still white. And we survived and we did it and we got our education and things worked out well. Why did we feel that we didn't have the ability to succeed? Something in us told us we could not succeed. And therefore, we have to wait to see what the US was doing, what Australia was doing, what the UK was doing. Not that they weren't doing anything different or anything that we couldn't learn from, that's true. But they should be learning from us because we've done without for so long. We don't have the infrastructure, the internet that turns on like that all the time. So we should have been able to pivot very quickly and adjust, but we didn't. And the question is why? I think that's the question a lot of people want to answer and should be answering right now. Right? Not that what we should learn or what we shouldn't learn, but why were we so we were shaken by not grasping or using what we already knew to succeed? I think that's a better question. I don't know if that helps.
Wow, and it certainly brings to the forefront resilience and being prepared for it. Yeah, and there's so many things that we could talk about for a longer time. But I'm going to open up to other persons to pose a question. You can just raise your hand and we'll give you, acknowledge you and allow you to ask your question. I know both Dr. Deacon and Paria might have additional questions, but I'm going to just invite the others and then we'll come back. We have about 15 more minutes and certainly I've been enjoying this intimate conversation. And I can see this happening and continuing. Perhaps we'll continue. It doesn't have to be with Dr. Dickson, but certainly this is certainly something that we can continue. So I don't know if there are any questions from the rest of the members, subtle members. What question do you think you'll want to pose? Javed, Justin, Mark, any questions regarding the theme that you think you'll want to get some clarity on? Certainly now is the time to pose it. Javed, I see you gearing for a question or comment or comment.
No, I just found it really interesting, eye-opening to hear the perspective, to hear her perspective, because she's Dr. Dickson, you are correct. I mean, we could do so much. We have done so much without, and the pandemic hit us, and we were like headless chickens. And I think from where I sit, not now, but when the pandemic happened, I think people just did not want to do what is required to succeed. I think people, I know I'm just making this is my observation, right? But they did not want to do beyond what is written on a document, They just did not want to make that extra sacrifice to ensure that learning continues. And it's sad because things could have gone. It was really hard for a lot of students, but it could have easily gone from being hard to very, very difficult for them. But we had some schools, I'll talk about the primary and secondary schools. We had some primary and secondary schools. I know this is a HE discussion as well, but we had some primary and secondary schools who did nothing, and we had some who accepted the challenge and went up against everyone who was saying, we can't do this. No, this cannot happen. Teaching cannot happen. Students don't have any laptops. They don't have any devices, and they made it work.
Yeah,
so I really think that that's a really interesting perspective.
Lever, if you may, let me
Yes,
just
yes, go ahead.
One thing I always caution people to say, Javed, is don't say people who didn't want to do things. Circumstances are that when you're in a particular environment and you're not seeing it from that person's perspective, things can look different for them.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're seeing and what you see in their space to look like, and their context and their experiences to look like, is not necessarily what they're seeing, their space and their context to look like. One thing I could tell you, here in Australia, my kids' school is literally, if I were to take a measuring tape, less than 1K away from my house, in front of my house.
Okay.
But because I live in a dead-end street, she has to walk all the way around, or I have to drive her all the way around. All right. And they said she wasn't engaged. She did all of the assignments. She handed in everything on time. Why wasn't she engaged? Because she did not come to the Zoom sessions. Why didn't she come to the Zoom sessions? Because I had Zoom sessions at the same time. And I couldn't manage too. I could only manage myself. And I said, well, you did the assignments, go do something else. I am going to do my work now that I've gotten you to do the assignments. It was interpreted from a teacher's point of view that she wasn't engaged. Perspectives make a difference. So I always say, I know it's very frustrating. I have lived in Trinidad, I've worked in Trinidad, I understand, right? I actually helped a couple of primary school teachers, and they were exhausted. They were absolutely livid and exhausted with trying to do what they knew they could do and being told that no, ignore what you could do and do what I'm telling you to do. So they had that struggle. So perspective is always important when we're looking at the challenges that we experience in teaching and learning. And I always tell people, don't be quick to cast that, that aspersion against a person. Be careful, because until you ask the right, and it's the question you ask, the right question you ask, then you'll understand what's going on in that space.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Julia, go ahead. You're muted.
Awesome. Hi, hello, I'm Julia, Dr. Julia Kotsubu. I'm joined a little bit late, sorry for that, but I'm really enjoying the conversation so far, and especially these comparison between schools. And what I realized, I just started a research project with the School of Education on virtual reality tools as learning tools. And what we are doing is we are assessing whether they're really appropriate for learning, because I think this is also an aspect of this whole process, and this takes a little bit time and experience. We use a lot of tools which are available on the internet or what we think is useful, and we do not know whether it's really useful, because sometimes they look like, but then, I mean, learning something different, and we also have to learn, for instance, to keep the ethical standards. And when we write a book, for instance, a learning book, then it's several times go through the review process. We check whether it's really in what students should learn, whether it is equipped for learning. But when we use online tools, we are very sort of careless. And so that's my experience, what I had during the pandemic. So I hope that in future we're using and employ all the tools, but we are also become critical about whether they really deliver what they promise, and whether more or less we teaching staff and students are all guinea pigs now in the period, because the market weren't prepared for this COVID. There were some online learning tools, but the market exploded with advertising. You can also use this for education, but is this really true? So that's, for instance, what we right now testing with our virtual reality tool. It's just a comment.
Thank you.
And I'll respond nevertheless. I know, Leroy, you're going to kick me out just now, but
no, I won't.
I'm doing some work in that space as well, Julia, and it'll be great to hear what you're doing as well. But it's not only whether the tool is appropriate, it's how you use the tool. Because there are different features in every single tool, and how you use the tool on the feature in that space for that design, for that discipline, makes a difference. It makes a huge difference. I can tell you right now, a lot of people don't know this. I've been trained immensely in all kinds of design tools, Adobe Creative, all of those things. The quickest tool for me to use to design little emojis or whatever I need to design is PowerPoint. Why? Because PowerPoint has since become powerful. Its design palette has become powerful for me enough to not have to go and use Adobe. which requires a license which is 10 times more expensive than Microsoft.
Mhm.
And I design what I need to design using PowerPoint. And I get it working and I move on quickly. So how you use a tool and how you use the feature of that tool is more important towards learning and performance than what the tool is and what it says it can deliver.
Mhm. Thank you for that. Okay, Dr. Zephyrin, Justin?
I'm trying to read, yes, I'm trying to read all of the things.
Yeah, and it certainly is, we see resilience even in the library. Linda, you were saying that you were not headless chickens, you were intentional, you were resilient, you continue to provide service. And I've seen some very, perspectives from library and support. Certainly persons were supported through, they had chat service, they had, so certainly students were supported from that standpoint. Dr. Justin, you could go ahead and pose your question. You're muted.
Oh, yeah. So I just unmuted. Good morning once again. Camille, I was just thinking about the theme and the conversation that is taking place here with regard to the difficulty in dealing or coping with that transition to, during the emergency remote teaching. I think it wasn't so much that persons necessarily didn't know what to do, because we saw with the library there, but I think it was an element of change management and dealing with the disruption that came. I think because it caught persons by surprise, I think that had an element had a role to play in it. It's almost like it happened, and okay, now what do we do? How do we cope with this? So I think, and linking it to the theme with ready, set, click, I don't think persons were ready to deal with that disruption. So in light of that, so that was a comment, but now is the question. What points do you have so persons are prepared for certain disruptions? And I'm speaking more with regard to teaching and learning. How can we be prepared for disruptions such as the pandemic? Well, now we're in an endemic somewhat, but how can we be prepared for it? So before we get to set and click, how do we get ready? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. So it's a very interesting question. And I'm going to tell you what I'm going to say. Take it with a pinch of salt, right? We have to be resilient. We have to be flexible. We have to be cautious. We have all of these things we have to be in order to survive. And that's what the endemic has taught us today. Part of that is that we seem to ignore that we are human and we are going to be reactive. And how you put a person in any given situation, how I will react, you will react differently. So that means now you're measuring flexibility and endurance and resilience in any kind of narrative. All right, that is difficult to create. That is difficult to create. Systems can create it better than individual human beings. You can only hope with individual human beings that they are that flexible moving forward. I think our children today are now growing up because they've grown up in a pandemic kind of situation. They're aware. You have children now who have never been and socialized with other kids in face-to-face environments because of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So they're understanding what that looks like to them. So what I have said to people is that systems, and that's where you have a lot of literature coming out about well-being and understanding and support. I don't think our systems support us much as human beings. They support us as work bees. They want us to work and they want the outcomes. Yes. But they don't support us when it comes to, I have a cut on my foot, or I didn't sleep last night, or I need to think a little more before I respond. I need a response now. That's what they want from us. That inflexibility is what they want from us in a flexible environment.
Right.
So there's a bit of a pull and a tug going on right now in understanding what systems need from us and what systems want from us. And what we're seeing a lot with a lot of systems now is they're realizing that they too have to shift to make the accommodation so that we can be flexible. All right. So right now, I've worked mostly, even though my university is back face to face, I've worked mostly at home because my boss understands the need for me to not be in that space where people are still getting COVID. People are still getting sick. I'm still recovering right now from a flu. So there's a lot of different needs, and I don't think people would be this lenient 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Right.
You'd be like, come out with your cool because you have to teach. Right? Come and do your job and sit down at your desk and sneeze on everybody and cough on everybody and then shake their hands, right? And still do your job in the labs wherever you need to be, right? But now we have come somewhat softer and understand, but still resilient in understanding that we need to shift and maneuver. So it's not change management alone. Is an understanding of human nature within that change management process that we need to look at. A little systems thinking and a little systemic thinking of what we need to do and what that means for us going forward. This is not the first time the world has experienced a pandemic.
Exactly.
But it's the first time the world has experienced a pandemic in an information and technological age where everybody saw it, stood up and saw it. They literally saw it coming to them because before we didn't know. It just happened. All right. I hope that helps.
Thanks.
Thank you. I don't know if there are other questions, but certainly I really enjoy this. I see, Mark, I'm going to invite you to pose your question. Go ahead quickly. I know
Camille, quick one concerning the Ready Set part. How did you navigate student feedback, students' contribution before putting things in place to approach your teaching throughout the pandemic?
Okay, rephrase that question for me, please.
So how was student feedback treated with? What innovation was there? How did it guide things during the pandemic, the remote teaching?
Okay, so for me, innovation was not my first thing. Wellness was my first thing. I wanted to make sure my students were well enough to actually learn. And in that means I had to be a little more compassionate. So when someone said, listen, I could not deal with this right now, I have this going on in the back of my head, I ease up on my deadlines. But of course, we are bounded by what the university system is and what the university timelines are. So as much as I can ease up, it's going to be a hard deadline that comes. So I did shift in my design of my assignments. I had a different level for what I call a cutoff as to the bare needs of what I needed students to learn. And I measured that first and foremost, because not everybody was going to get it. It was clear to me during that time that not everybody was going to get it. At the same time, you had people who were sick. So you have to understand, try to feed and try to educate a sick mind and a sick body in a discipline. It's hard. Imagine trying to educate a person who's well. That's hard right by itself. But when you're sick and you're worried about going out and if you have food and if you could see people and if you're feeling the social walls closing in on you and you don't know if you get the vaccine and you don't know if you had the vaccine, what it would do, and all of these different things happening at the same time, and then put learning on top of that. It's worse than a pressure cooker, right? So you have to really, one thing I've been talking about lately is that, and Leroy, you intimated this, resilience. Resilience has a different meaning for us now. a totally different meaning for us now. Because in resilience, we're not only talking before about the world and the economic status of can we work without or can we work with? Can we work sick? Can we understand that others are sick while we're working? That's a different level of resilience.
Wow.
Because we don't know how sick we're talking about.
Mhm.
So getting ready, set as and click as the theme is, understanding the soft areas that we have ignored for years about what we would like people to do and how we would like people to work and conform in our teaching and learning spaces, especially students. I have students today who were in my class riding a train and still doing my tutorials. Riding a train. Don't know if you've read up. Australia has right now, at least New South Wales, where I am in Sydney, has gone through 4 to 5 weeks of train and bus strikes.
Wow.
Any moment it could stop. So when they get a train strike, when they get on a train, they're taking it because you just don't know. Right? Some people will come and they can't get back home. She can get here in time, so she's on the train trying to do the assessment and trying to do because it was an in-class assessment. These are the things. Should I have said, well, no, wait till they come here, whatever? No, I have to be flexible. I have to be, understand the nature of things and help her get to her finish line as well as me getting all of my students to the finish line at the same time. So those are the kinds of things, the mindsets we have to, I think we tend to ignore the fact that we are human beings and that we are teaching human beings. It's not robots, and I think that soft part is what we may be ignoring in our teaching and learning space, besides understanding how it works.
Wow. And certainly, Camille, I'm seeing where your introduction to human-computer interaction there is showing the human the need for us to understand that human turn, and Alana is indicating that flexibility as well necessary in the systems for a person to understand. So I honestly really enjoyed this conversation. I don't know if we had any additional burning questions. We are beyond our time, but I just want, and I know you did excellent giving your voice. I know you're recovering. And so we really appreciate you taking the time out to have that conversation with us. And so I want to say thank you and do safe, full recovery. And we'll look forward to hearing you on Thursday. And those of you who haven't heard, certainly it's an opportunity for us to promote the Premium Teaching Awards, which is going to be on Thursday, 22nd of September at 5 p.m. Stay tuned to the YouTube channel. And so you will certainly, it's a hybrid event, but the general persons are invited, participants are invited to join via YouTube. I'm trying to multitask, and when that happens, that's not very good. I always leave something unattended. So certainly, Camille, thank you for your commitment and certainly sharing your time with us. And we look forward to this session. And so thank you so much. I don't know if you want to any burning takeaway, key final statements, and then we will just say, we'll just call it quits.
All I can say to you guys is thank you for having me. But what I would like to say first and foremost is believe that you have a way to contribute to this space. It's a lot of work to do. Teaching and learning, it's a lot of work to do, right? And just keep doing it and keep going forward. Right? You will your goal, and your goal does not have to look like someone else's goal. That's something I was just teaching my daughter today. Your goal looks like your goal.
Yes, context. Yeah.
That's
so
right.
we can say stay calm and keep on learning, keep on teaching, keep on moving, and you're resilient. Thank you so much, Camille. And we look forward to your inspiring, because we already anticipate that it's going to be inspiring I can sense that. So thank you. You're seeing the round of applause. Oh, I'll give one as well. A round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right.
Yeah.